Welcome, my dear students of class 9A and 9B to my civics class. Today's points, as I mentioned, please look at it. Objectives of directive principles. Number 2, classification of directive principles. Number 3, directive principles and fundamental rights. 4, welfare state. 5, constitutional amendment. First point, objectives of directive principles. What are the objectives of the directive principles? Now I am going to discuss. The directive principles has some objectives. Number 1, the state should work towards a reduction of economic inequality, and inequalities in the state. The state should create social and economic conditions which become helpful to the people of the country. The state will provide a number of facilities, privileges for the citizens so that they can lead a very enjoyable life, and they cannot raise any question of inequality. People of different categories, different classes are there. They are given equal rights, equal opportunities. For that reason, the constitution maker Dr. B.R. Ambedkar framed a constitution for all group of people of the country. Another point is that the state has to provide free education to children till the age of 14 years. Another objective of directive principle. The state should consider its primary duty to use of intoxicating drinks. The state must ensure the living wage and working condition for the workers. The state should, protect historical monuments and other, buildings of historical interest from destruction. And the state should aim at establishing a welfare state in India where there will be no, concentration of wealth in the hands of a few sections of people, because wealth is generally concentrated for a section of people who become rich, prosperous, wealthy at the cost of common people. That's why it needs to ensure equal pay for equal work for both men and women in the country. So these are the objectives of the directive principles. The next one, classification of directive principles. What are the classifications of directive principles? There are certain classifications of the directive principles. The directive principle promotes educational, economic interest of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, duty of the state to raise the level of nutrition and the standard of living and to improve public health. Separation of judiciary from executive, another classification of the directive principle. Application of the principles, state to secure social order for the promotion of welfare of the people. Certain principles of the policy of the state, like equal rights to men and women, ownership of resources, equal pay for equal work, protection of children, equal justice, and free legal aid to citizens having economic and other disabilities, organization of agriculture and animal husbandry. So these are the classification of the directive principles of state policy. But one of the most important work is done by the state, that is separation of judiciary from executive, separation of judiciary from executive, because executive generally tries to establish influence over the judicial system. But in our country, the democratic form of government has not provided any opportunity to ignore the system of justice for the you know for the judicial you know for the justice of the courts, different courts. The justice can be justice can become neutral only when the state would not interfere in the process of judicial system. For that reason, the system of classification of directive principle has got it ensured that judiciary would work independently and executive would not interfere on the judicial system. That's why separation of judiciary from executive. Provision for free and compulsory education for children. So these are the classifications of the directive principles. The next one, directive principle and fundamental rights. There are some differences between fundamental rights and directive principles. What are the differences between the fundamental rights and judicial and the directive principles of state policy? There are certain differences between directive principles and fundamental rights. What are the differences? Directive principles are not be enforced by any court of law, number one. But fundamental rights are enforced in any court of law because it is justiciable to any court of law. Fundamental rights, directive principles aimed at securing welfare state, social and economic freedoms. Fundamental rights aim at assuring political freedom to the citizen. Fundamental rights, aim at assuring political freedom to the citizens. Directive principles are given a place of permanence, but fundamental rights are given a place of pride by the Constitution. Directive principles need legislation for their proper implementation, but fundamental rights are automatically enforced. Directive principles are meant for a welfare state, but fundamental rights are meant for each and every citizen of the country. So these are the basic differences between the directive principles of state policy and fundamental rights. These are the basic differences between directive principles and fundamental rights. And next point, welfare state. What is welfare state? A state where people could live peacefully, and a principle of equality would be established strongly. There would be no problem. Problem would be solved by the government. People would automatically become rich and prosperous without being violated. Their fundamental rights would not be violated. They can easily go to any court whenever their fundamental rights are violated by anyone else. In a welfare state, the state would become rich and prosperous. Its economy stability would automatically become powerful by means of good economic policies, good reforms, good development, good growth in all fields, in the field of education, in the field of in the field of science and technology, in the field of employment, in the field of rural development, in the field of urban development, everywhere the government and her policies would work systematically and give a step practically, the growth and development will become possible. And this system, this entire procedure through which the state becomes a state of welfare or a welfare state, the programs of the government are generally fulfilled, and people become rich, prosperous. Government can run smoothly, and the country's fame and glory reach far and wide. There is a international, in the field of international politics, in the field of international trade, everywhere country's reputation reached far and wide, and country is able to establish cordial relationship, brotherhood with other foreign countries of the world. This is known as welfare state, my dear students. And last point, constitutional amendment. Whenever constitutional amendment is required, the government, as the head of the government, the Prime Minister can pass a bill. Then the bill is discussed in both the two houses of parliament. Then ultimately it goes to the office of the president for his consent. And as soon as the president gives his consent on the bill, then that bill becomes a law. And then the Prime Minister can amend the Constitution of India. This is amendment of the Constitution. Now, why are these amendments important? This amendment is required because fundamental rights sometimes are not, properly protected. Sometimes, as the head of the judicial system, the Prime Minister, the Supreme Court is liable to protect the fundamental rights of the citizens, but there are some problems. Sometimes the process is, interrupted. Although Supreme Court issues a number of writs, and ultimately Supreme Court is able to protect the fundamental rights of the citizens, but there is no system of providing free legal aid service for the poor people of India. In that case, sometimes the process of enjoying fundamental rights of the poor people is generally interrupted. That's why constitutional amendment or modifications, changes or additions to the constitution sometimes are required. Up to this, my dear students. Thank you very much.